Welcome to the Project Zion podcast. This podcast explores the unique spiritual and theological gifts Community of Christ offers for today's world.
Hello, and welcome to Project Zion podcast. This is Brittany Mangelson, and I'm going to be your host for today. And here's the thing, Project Zion listeners. This is the first podcast that I have filmed or recorded face-to-face in well over a year. This is what the vaccination does for us. When you are vaccinated, you can be with other vaccinated people. So I'm here to record a What's Brewing episode with Jason Eyre. Now, Jason is actually one of our main editors for Project Zion. So if you've listened to, anything on PZP, you've listened to Jason's work. But we are turning the mic on him today. And we are going to talk about a project that he did through work that had to do with the pandemic and getting kids the internet and the way that he lives out mission through his job. So, Jason, welcome. Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit to us?
Well, thank you, Brittany. And yeah, I think this might be the third podcast I've been on. I know I did one with a panel, and then you interviewed me about my story back when we were starting some of the, I can't think what the series is named.
Fair Trade.
No, it's before Fair Trade. This is like clear back a few years ago, and it was the liturgical calendar. It's the ones Karen did.
Yes, yeah. Jason's an OG PZPer.
Old school there. Anyway, I'm really excited to be here today. My name's Jason Eyre, and I've been a member of Community of Christ for a couple of years, and I've been a seeker for about 5 years, 5.5 now. Wow, time's flying. But I'm here today to talk a little bit about a project I did in my professional life. And in my professional job, I'm the technology department coordinator at Murray City School District. Murray City School District is a small school district of about 6,000 students covering the community of Murray, which is in the heart of the Salt Lake Valley. So think Utah, think Salt Lake, think Murray, and it's just this great little place in the middle of town.
Yeah, so you work with schools, like you said, and I don't know if our listeners have heard, but we are in the midst of a global pandemic, and when that happened back in March in the United States, schools were moved online. So being the technology department coordinator, that was a massive task, and being the person that is essentially in charge of helping teachers and everyone get online in an entire district is a huge, huge deal. I know as a parent, that side of it, and my kids do not go to the district that you work in. And so it was done very differently in my district. And I was always very jealous of the people that were in Murray District because of your efforts. And I will say, to put it in perspective a little bit, your efforts have gotten you national attention. You've been all over the news here, but then you've also been, was it Good Morning America or the Today Show?
It's the Sunday Today Show. We were the Sunday feature back in January on the Today Show with Willie Geist. I've noticed that NBC News and their parent company Comcast have been very cognizant of the problems that families are having. And to be quite honest, when our schools went into closure last March, that's the first thing that we did, was reach out and give our parents information about the Internet Essentials program that Comcast has, and tried to get as many families that could afford that connected through that. And we found that we connected all but about 13% of the families that live in our district. And it's funny to hear you talk about the district we live in, because Brittany and I both live in the same community. And our school district didn't send Chromebooks home. They offered one per family, and the internet in our neighborhood just completely slowed down. And I even had to use an extra hotspot I had from work sometimes to connect to meetings. And so it was interesting, because we went from this world where schools were a thing and where the kids were in school to all of a sudden something happened that we never thought we would see, and we were all sent out for distance learning. The story I'm telling today is about us building our own cellular network or our own LTE network. And we decided to put radios on our school buildings that will go out into the community a short distance, and then we can give our students hotspots or routers or gateways that actually connect to our network and help them have an experience at home just like they're in the school. And it's been interesting to see where that experience has led us. The story starts actually about the time that my faith transition started, back in 2016. And I was living down in southern Utah in a town called Panguitch, and I was working in a different school district. It was the Garfield County School District. And we had just got a new superintendent, and he asked me to send the Chromebooks home with the students. And so what we did was we had a one-to-one program, that's what we call it in the education industry, and we sent the Chromebooks home with the students. And we found that when those Chromebooks went home, that some of them had a great experience and got on the internet and worked. And if you know anything about Chromebooks, they have to have the internet to work. But a lot of those Chromebooks went into households that didn't have internet, or had internet, but it wasn't fast enough for a couple of kids to be on at the same time, and then people to watch Netflix and those kind of things. And this was in very rural communities in south central Utah. And the one thing we noticed that was almost every one of those students could walk out on their front porch and they could see the school building. But yet they lived a mile or two away from the phone office, and with DSL and other technologies, their connections were so slow that their Chromebooks couldn't see our filtering and thus wouldn't work when they were home. And that's what led me to try and look for a solution that would get the internet from the school out into their houses.
Yeah, because I remember when, COVID hit and realizing that everyone's schooling was going to be online. I immediately thought of a conversation I had with you right before the pandemic at House Church here in Utah County. And this was literally a week or two before the world shut down, and COVID was already on the West Coast of the United States. And I think I was in deep denial about what was about to happen. And I think that you had more of a realistic view, because you were like, what would you do? What would we do if, we had to stay at home for 2-3 weeks? What would we do if we had to stay home for a month? And I remember thinking, there's no way that's going to happen. And then lo and behold, literally the next week, we were all at home. And immediately thinking how lucky I was to have the internet. We had an extra laptop. We had 2 laptops at my house. We had an iPad. So I had one kid on the laptop, one kid on the iPad, and then the other kid just sort of waited for their turn. We ended up going out and purchasing cheap Chromebooks because we could. And I figured, there are kids in our school that have multiple kids at home. And if the Chromebook that we could borrow would better go to another family, then let's do it. So we went out and bought, $70 cheap Chromebooks, and that's what we had to do. And my kids were online for about 6 months. And so the backdrop of all of this is just this understanding and realization that weighed heavily on me, thinking of all of the kids in Utah that don't have access to the internet, that don't have access to technology, and yet they're still expected to show up every morning for school online. So I'm curious how you organized this so quickly. I mean, I know that it was a process to get to where you are today, but just tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the story moves northward for me. In 2017, I went I went to work for the Murray City School District, and I immediately, one of the first things we did when school started in 2018 was have a Chromebook with every student's name in the district. Now, fortunately, we had some budget money and we had some state grants that helped us. We had a 3-year plan and we were able to escalate that up to a year. So in 2018 in Murray, every student had a Chromebook with their name on it. In 2019, we sent them home with the students in the high school. When we started school in 2020, we liked the program. Everyone was scared that it might not work in an urban area like it had in a rural area, but it worked. And in 2020, we sent them home with our middle school students as well when the school year started. So fast forward to March, and it's interesting you were talking about our conversation at house church. What a great memory back when we could go to church in person.
We were so naive.
Oh my heavens. I never ever dreamed that what happened would really happen. But our plan in Murray was that each student had a Chromebook with their name on it. And the good thing is those students had been using them since the first of the school year. But in our elementary school, those Chromebooks were in carts. And so we had a plan. We had a snow day, and so we were going to do a snow makeup day, thinking the pandemic would never happen, and that we would take those Chromebooks out of the carts and actually send them home in bubble wrap bags with the kids for a few days. And we would all go through the experience, and it would be there if anything ever crazy really happened. And it was funny, you were talking about how the West Coast had it, and New York hadn't really started yet in March. And then all of a sudden, one of the professional basketball players on our basketball team on a Tuesday night comes onto TV and says he's tested positive. And then that seems like that's the first that we heard of this happening in Utah. 2 hours later, all of our schools were emptied. Fortunately, I was able to send a person to each school, and we were able to get all the Chromebooks handed out. So that was a pretty, I'll call it a traumatic experience in hindsight. We thought we would see the kids back in school on Tuesday or Wednesday, and then that Friday, the governor closed schools in Utah for the rest of the school year.
Yeah. My Facebook memories, recently have been about that. And they made me cry because it really was a traumatic time for kids. And again, as a parent, my heart just went out to all these kids who never got to say goodbye to their friends, never got to say goodbye to their teachers. We had really, really good teachers that year, and my kids just never really saw them again. And it's really sad. But being able to have technology in their homes, have computers, provided kids some sense of normalcy, kept them connected to their school and their teachers to some degree. So as traumatic as it was, I am glad for school staff, district school staff, that we're able to get things going. So keep going. I mean,
well, I have to take my hat off to the teachers. It was a lot of work, and our teachers had done a great job of using technology in the classroom. And we had done some training on blended learning, which is where the teachers teach and record it, and then the students watch it while they're with them, and then they watch what students that get it and don't and adapt and help. And all of a sudden we were in this distance learning, and our school buildings were all closed. We locked the doors. The teachers taught from their homes as well. And we saw a few things happen. My job changed quite a bit. I went from helping teachers teach in their classroom to helping teachers teach from home and helping students stay connected. I have a team of 6 people that help me, and we all came to one central office. We changed our phone system around so that we could do phone and tech support. And then the kids who had broken their Chromebooks that we didn't know about, they brought them in, and we fixed them all centrally from one place as well, and had a bunch of broken screens and little things like that. But we learned that without the device and without internet connectivity, that students couldn't connect. And I learned a lot from other families. The program that I had always worked on in the rural district, and our vision that we had had for the network that we eventually built, was to help economically challenged students. But what we realized when we closed our schools and sent students to only learn from home, we realized that there were a lot of other challenges in kids' lives. Like some students were learning English. Some students were from immigrant families, and their immigrant culture may not even be online. We had students that were in an apartment building that had Wi-Fi, but they'd never used it because that wasn't what their family did. And then we also had families with 3 or 4, and being in Utah, 5, 6, or 7 kids, and this internet connection that they had just used for Netflix and maybe a couple of kids, with all the kids going online at the same time. We had some parents that were starting to struggle. The other thing that the pandemic did that none of us ever envisioned was brought mom and dad home and isolated them there, whether in quarantine or to prevent exposure. And so suddenly everybody was home. And what we found in the larger families was some of the smaller kids were getting kicked off, and mom or dad had to do their job or they couldn't pay for the internet connection. And so we started seeing kind of this prioritization happen in people's lives. And we did get some hotspots from Verizon, who was the cellular company, and sent them to some of our students that were really struggling. Comcast, as I said a little bit earlier, helped most of them, but we still saw some gaps.
I cannot imagine the logistical nightmare, because in my own home it was a nightmare, and I know in my own little neighborhood it was a nightmare, and there was a lot of networking among parents, and but having the understanding, being faced with the reality that that's happening throughout your entire district, and just not knowing what kids have support at home, what kids don't, who falls below, like low on the priority scale of who needs the internet first. And I do have a question, and maybe this wasn't like district wide, but were your teachers teaching live, like face to face, virtually, of course, but like on Zoom?
Our teachers learned Zoom very, very quickly. And unfortunately, working with Community of Christ and doing Forward with Community, which is a Zoom service, I had a couple years of Zoom experience and knew I could support them on Zoom. And so we quickly moved them to that platform. Zoom removed their restrictions on their free accounts for education and supported our teachers with that. And our teachers began teaching live. One of the decisions I had made was we gave our teachers Microsoft Surface computers. And so they actually had the chalkboard with them and they could write on the screen. And our students really liked learning math that way. They felt like their math teachers were teaching them just like they did in the classroom. The other subjects, it took them a lot longer to get used to being online and to move online. But as much as possible, our teachers were encouraged, and they did teach on Zoom. What we learned was not all the students could be there on Zoom at the same time to receive it. And back in the closure last year, we didn't have a lot of places to record it and put it up. We ended up doing that when we got ready to do this school year, and we're doing that a lot more now. But this was just such an unexpected closure. Things happened so quickly. But what we did start doing was trying to make sure our teachers started looking for their students out in the online world, so to speak. And we started getting notified of students who weren't connecting, and that's when I started making some arrangements and things. That was March. April and May, everyone did the best they could online. We all finished up the school year, but nobody knew what would happen in the 2020 school year. Yeah,
so did you just, in your position, in your job, did you just think, okay, we have option A, option B, option C? Like, how did you even know how to prepare?
Well, we were happy with what we had done, and our state board of education actually recognized us for being not just progressive, but actually being the leader in the state of Utah, for having devices in the kids' hands that went home that day. We had put a plan in place and we were able to execute it. What we did do, we realized that students were not going to be playing outside all summer and socializing like they normally would. So we actually made a decision to leave their Chromebooks with them over the summer. And we took some of the software that we would use during the school year, like software that teaches them to read, or Zern is a program that they use to do math and things like that. We actually took those applications and bought an extended subscription of them and encouraged our students to take them and use them over the summer. And we hoped that some of those kids that were lonely at least had their Chromebook there as a companion to give them some learning opportunities. And so that's how we approached the summer break.
I think that's really important, because in quote unquote normal times, there already is an education gap. Kids don't retain everything over the summer. And I'm not like a person that's overly concerned about the academic success of children, just because I do kind of think it all works out and let kids be kids over the summer. But you're right, during the summer of the pandemic, kids aren't necessarily with their peers like they are. And if they can connect online with someone, I know that my kids, they were still emailing, through the little Google Classroom. They were emailing their friends, and that was really important for them. So I appreciate that you kept the technology in the hands of students and trusted them and trusted that they would use them for social connection and for academic connection. So yeah, what did it look like going into the fall?
So in the fall, the governor made the decision that as many students that could should go back to school in person. And we totally agreed with him. And we did give our parents the option of doing online learning or hybrid or fully in school. We had about 20% of our students elect to be online only. And then we had the principals manage hybrid, so we never got an exact number on those. But we still had a lot of students learning online. We also had some rules around when a certain number, I think it was 15 students in a school tested positive, that school would have to go into a 2-week closure. And we had that happen a couple of times. So kind of getting back to the network side of the story, the Chromebooks, the kids kept the Chromebooks into the school year. And we actually were able somehow to buy some new Chromebooks as part of our refresher program. And we ended up sending them home with our first and second graders so that they could have a Chromebook at school and a Chromebook at home. So right now, actually kindergarten through second grade, they have 2 Chromebooks assigned to them if they're in school. And if they're online, they just have the one. And if they have the hybrid, they had the 2 so that they could learn either place. And fortunately, we didn't have to go in closure. We did find that the kids weren't spreading this like we were worried, which has been kind of a relief for us. But in the United States, the solution to this from our Congress and our government was to provide CARES funding. And then the state legislature directed some of those things that happened. In Utah, we were told that we should use it to build up our Wi-Fi networks. And I negotiated a pretty sweet deal with our Wi-Fi vendor, Extreme Networks, and used the extra money that was left in the budget to actually purchase the LTE equipment. We first built an LTE network at Murray High School in April of 2019. So I thought about it clear back in 2016, but it took about 3 years for some newer programs to come into place. The technology is called Citizens Broadband Radio Service, or CBRS. And what happened was in the past, to get frequencies to use with cell phones and LTE and other technology, you would Verizon or AT&T or T-Mobile in America would spend billions of dollars for this, and we didn't have billions of dollars. And so the government took some of the military use frequencies and made them available in what they called a shared spectrum model, which means people could use them in different places at a lower power and pay a few dollars a month, per radio. And so what happened is we took something that 10 years ago would have cost millions, even billions of dollars, and we were able to spend about a few tens of thousands of dollars to buy the radios themselves, and then start actually serving out in our community. And the first generation of radios came out last fall, and they only reached maybe a block from each of our schools. A block in Utah is a fairly good distance, but it's not covering our community. And we used the CARES funds to buy those radios, and then we negotiated an upgrade to the second generation, which we're going to be out in a few months. So this would have been the August timeframe we started installing those. The pandemic caused some issues that we weren't ready for, like we had a hard time buying Chromebooks, Dell ran out of laptops, almost everything that used computer chips. I mean, even now they're not building cars like they used to because they can't get the supplies. And that caused those second generation radios to take longer than anticipated. In fact, I actually had 2 vendors that I had purchase orders for who went out of business. Their manufacturers went out of business and they weren't able to deliver them to us. We finally put a plan B in place, and in December, right, the week before Christmas, got 6 of the radios of the 25 that we had wanted to use, and we started putting them up. And so I used some database technology to do what's called heat mapping. I geographically coded our students' addresses into GPS coordinates and used mapping software to look at them. And we looked at economic need, and we looked at families of households of 3 or more, and we superimposed them, and that showed us where the first radios were going. We were pointing at apartment complexes, we were pointing at places where the immediate need was the greatest, and then we would start filling in the rest of it. We decided that we should do a little bit of public relations with this and get the word out to our parents, but we're involved with some statewide organizations, and there's plans to do a lot more of this around Utah, and some of it was done with CARES funds that way as well. And so we decided to hold, instead of a ribbon cutting, we thought we would do a cable connecting, and we had a brand new governor who was very interested in this technology and engaged with the types of efforts we were undertaking. So we decided to have this ribbon connecting, and we invited our governor to connect the ribbons. That was in mid-January. We did a press release. We have a public relations person who does a great job at the district, and he had sent all this out. The real surprise, this press conference was set for Thursday at 9 o'clock. Tuesday afternoon, we get notice not from our local news stations, but from NBC News, that they want to send a crew out. And the reason they wanted to send the crew out was we were one of the first places that was vaccinating teachers. Mm-hmm. And that was taking place on Wednesday afternoon. And so the NBC News crew came out Wednesday. We took them and let them visit some of our classrooms and let them see what the pandemic learning looked like. They spent some time with one of our online teachers, and she showed them how she had the kids at Zoom and kids in the classroom there at the same time and those things. And then they, about midday, asked me to go out on top of our building and stand by one of the radio towers. So we just used these little 6-foot towers, and had me show off one of our radios. And then they actually also covered and interviewed the governor. And we were really quite surprised to get national press attention out of this. And our normal press conference went on, and all the local news stations covered it, as well as the local newspapers. And then it really started to take off. One of the things that we've been trying to do was, the term is really to close the homework gap. Mm-hmm. That digital divide is what the industry has named that. We actually found a way very creatively in our community to do this. And since then, we've got 6 more radios we're putting up this week, and we've started sending gateways out to parents. We've had 180 students connect this last month through our network with the hybrid students, the online and everything, and we have a few hundred more gateways to get out to our parents. But it's been a really neat experience. Thinking back to Community of Christ and thinking to the phrase that keeps coming, it's the mission prayer. Mm-hmm. It's help me to be ready to respond. And in fact, we bought shirts for our staff that said Pandemic Digital Learning Response Team. That when the pandemic happened, we realized that there was no proactive planning that ever was mm-hmm. able to understand the scope and the breadth of what we really saw happen. There's never been another time outside of maybe 100 years ago that this really closed schools for that period of time. None of us, we were all vaccinated against polio and those things and never had any understanding. Even most of our administrators aren't even old enough to really go through what our grandparents went through with that. And so what we had to do was just be ready to respond. And it's interesting how that mission prayer has really taken a new focus in my life, and I look at things with it very differently. And I'm very proud that some of the good work we were doing for good reasons led to a better response for parents in our district.
Yeah, gosh, so many thoughts. So you helped kids, yes, but you also helped families because yes. Like you said, parents are working from home, and there's, in Utah, there's young kids all the way up to college kids, because a lot of college kids moved out of dorms and moved back yes. home, and this touched all of that. And when I think, in Community of Christ, we talk about mission, and it's how we live our faith. It's how we take our understanding of abolishing poverty and ending suffering and
congregations in mission.
Experience
that's right
congregations
there.
in mission. Yes, just because you're in a secular job doesn't mean that can't spill out. That your dedication to the mission initiatives can't spell out in the secular world. And I think too that we so often focus on the parents or on the college students or on the people that are going into the office or whatever. And the whole time during the early days of the pandemic, the kids. And once we realized that kids can't spread it as much as adults do, I still felt like the mental health of the kids or the social connection of the kids, it just is kind of an afterthought in so many conversations because they aren't high risk for COVID. And so they just kind of have gotten put on the back burner. And so I know that our district, not to throw our district under the bus, but we did not do as well of a job as your district did. Again, we live in the same school district. Our kids go to the same schools. But the Murray School District, I was very impressed and I will say jealous of how connected those kids were able to be, because I saw kids suffering all around me.
Yeah.
And nationally, you would see pictures of kids sitting in parking lots of McDonald's getting off their Wi-Fi. And, this has been, like you said, something that nobody prepared for, and realizing that there's no adults in the room. And I did air quotes there of there's no structure to help guide us through what happens if we all get put online. And so I'm just assuming that was a very overwhelming process to know that you and your team are responsible for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kids, really thousands at the beginning
6,000 of them.
At the beginning of the pandemic when everybody was online, but that you still continually have hundreds of kids that engage every single week.
I like to think of some of our efforts have been like the parable of the 90 and 9 and going and finding the lost sheep. We've spent a lot of time this year in our school district studying how the kids are and aren't using the Chromebooks. If we can't see them logging into their Chromebooks, we actually have people that go call the parents and social workers that go out and help make sure those students are engaging. And I think that it's so interesting how some of those, where is your spirit leading me today? The God spirit and the spirit of service and the spirit of hope. Just because it's my job and I'm getting paid for it doesn't mean that I can't, in a secular way, bless people in their lives. And I'm really happy to say that our efforts to help people be found, to help kids to learn, to help education to take place is so important, because being able to read and do math and write, those play so much into abolishing poverty and ending needless suffering. That needless suffering, I almost want to drill into that not being able to write others you, not fully being able to read is considered almost a disability, and and it's one of those targeted things. Working as a professional in education, I did learn that having students read on grade level by third grade is one of the most important things we have to do for our students, because their statistics have correlated that if they can't read on grade level by the end of third grade, that there's a very high probability they will not finish high school.
Wow.
And so that's why these targeted efforts, this response, this finding the lost ones, making sure students can engage. Another term that I learned as I went through some professional trainings was the term intersectionality. And I didn't realize how things stack up when the term we usually use is equity. We're trying to fix equity problems so that those kids that that not just equal, but some kids need more help to get to where the other kids are at, and that we had to focus above equality and to equity as a way to help close these gaps, not just the homework gap, but other learning gaps and other disabilities and other challenges.
Yeah, I thought of that when you talked about the map and you put everybody's address in and GPS and figured out who has the most kids at home, where are the apartments, where are the people that need it most. And you actually, I think you called it like a heat map, right? Yeah. Like you actually could physically see where the need was. And then that's
colored
where...
it like a rainbow in the red, the heat.
Yeah.
The highest concentrations were red.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And how would it be if we used a system like that for more social programs of like, these are the people that don't have health insurance or, whatever it may be. And we're able to...
I almost wonder if God has a heat map that, this is where we need to be led to. This is where our response needs to be.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can feel that you're being led in certain places.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes we can feel that out ourselves.
And I absolutely love that you were so poised to be in this position, that this story, like you said, started way back in 2016?
Yeah.
You said 2016?
It's something I'd worked on for years, and then we had thought in about 3 years, because the LTE technology in the CBRS only became publicly available in January of 2020.
Oh, wow.
We had been practicing with it in April, and during the pandemic, they sent us an experimental radio that took, like a Wi-Fi access point, has this all the way around antenna that just goes everywhere. They let us take a focused antenna and try it, and we hung it in the wrong places, and we did everything wrong in hindsight, but we learned from it.
Yeah.
And so now we're aiming our antennas right. We're using antennas that we can beam the signals a little bit farther, and with the heat maps, we know how and where we need to beam them. And so it's turned out to be just an amazing experience. The interesting thing is, as we continue to have more CARES funding come, I cannot believe what a role I'm playing, not just as that guy who's always on the news or was on the Today Show or has been on TV, but people all around the country are reaching out to me. I cannot believe the amazing people that are fighting for this type of thing and trying to close the digital divide in places like New York and Rhode Island and Michigan and all over the place. It's it's strange to find myself as a pioneer and in many ways as a leader. But I am happy to take what skills I've had and what I've learned and try to have a positive impact, not just on the students in my district, but other people that I can help around the state and around the country.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. If you had any, what did being on the news bring to you? Did it bring more curiosity? Were you contacted by other people? And it sounds like, yes, you were.
So in the internet world, we have what we call a denial of service attack. That's where more people or more traffic's coming at you than you can handle.
Yeah.
I feel like I kind of had that happen in January. The Today Show had a difference. There was one day when a tech director called my secretary in the morning and she's like, he would love to help you. He just doesn't have time. The afternoon, the superintendent called and says, I'm the superintendent. I need to talk to him. And we tried to get him a little bit of information. And I'm recording podcasts like this with UEN, with other organizations to help get the word out. We have a user group that we do trainings and we post them up to the uen.org website and things like that so that we can try as much as possible to get the word out. I've been surprised about the Salt Lake Tribune, the Deseret News did well, really neat written articles. The Christian Science Monitor actually featured us. It was really interesting because district leaders get these emails that are sent out every day. Last Thursday, the networking side of it's called COSN, the Consortium of School Networks, actually featured a picture of one of our students with her Chromebook and talked about our story in their email blast to everybody that this district is solving the digital divide. And it's something that's been a known problem for many years. And I don't claim to have the only solution, but I do have a solution. And the way that we've done it can be replicated. And we have partners in business. I'm actually doing a webinar this Wednesday that's going to go nationwide. In the first day, over 150 people signed up to see it. I'm a little nervous for it. I'm finding myself kind of being the person on this. Moldy Tech, who makes some of our favorite products, their vice president said that I am the de facto face of education and private and LTE networking. And my personality is to just kind of be a little bit bashful, and I blush a little bit, but at the same time, I've realized I've had to own it, and that I need to own it, and the world needs me to own it. And if I can help take my influence and what little knowledge I have and what things we've learned and we haven't learned and what vendors we've been able to get to work together to make all this happen, I'll do my part to change the world.
Yeah.
That's where God's leading me today, and my being ready to respond has been a blessing of joy and hope in other people's lives.
Yeah, all over the nation. Like I am just, when I first saw that this was getting picked up by local news and then very soon after that, national news, I have to admit that I was just beaming with pride and joy because we have worked together for so long in various church groups and
online
things.
Ministry. I mean, everyone in our congregation all of a sudden looked to us like, if we're going to have church, it's going to be you guys helping us. And this Zoom experience that we've had for a few years has become the Zoom experience a lot of people are using.
Yeah.
I do hope we get to go back in person soon. I miss seeing everybody.
I know. Oh, me too. But it is, what you're saying is true. And I think that in Community of Christ, we had been doing this online thing, trying to build legitimacy with people, and then suddenly folks didn't have many other options. And you're right, people did look to the Salt Lake congregation. And I remember calling you and saying, look, so-and-so is preaching on Sunday, but he's not comfortable coming because he's well over 70. And I just called our mission center president, and I think we're going online. And we did. Salt Lake did before World Church even called it. So I think that being proactive has helped you in this situation in your schooling.
And house church, we were able to move house church online. That's actually technically where my membership is. I consider myself a true seeker and really find connection in that side of this experience, so to speak.
Yeah. Jason, good stuff. And I've known that you've been busy, and I've every time another podcast comes out with you or another article, I have thought of course we've got to get him on PZP, the podcast that he helps edit. But I also wanted to give you just a little bit of space, but also take advantage of this. And yeah, now that we're both vaccinated, it's good to sit in the same room as you. This is exciting.
Well, it's we've been through a lot. People have been through a lot. I still, as I look back, I cannot believe how prophetic some of the things that we were working on with online church, working with our field apostle, with Robin Linkhart, to have the First Presidency and others consider doing communion online, and how important that was a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
And then they listened and responded to us and made that available, and now that's the way that communion's happening around the world.
Yeah.
And then on the other ordinances and things, I was one of the first people to be ordained. I did receive the priesthood last fall, and I was ordained in an online service. I went to Carla and Kuzma's house, and we had very, very strict rules, and I sat outside, and they rushed out and ordained me and rushed back in. But it was, my ordination's recorded with us wearing masks in the pandemic. It's very much, I'm glad that you're able to do more of that online. It was really touching when you were able to confirm Evan Charlie. Yeah. And have that happen online. He was someone who had been in online church with us, and it was such an amazing experience by itself. And his episode was just put up a month or two ago to listen to on the Free Trade series. But it's really amazing to see how we've been able to respond as a faith community and keep the mission going.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, we're all learning as we go, and we all are adapting to the tools that are available to us as we go. And when I think of you and your journey with your school district and how that's just spilled across the nation, it almost seems like it was this giant puzzle where like the pieces were there, the technology was there, but you needed to wait for certain things to align, but you were keeping your eye on the puzzle pieces, and then suddenly pandemic hits and you're like, I think that we could make this puzzle work. And then you started, I'm a very visual person, so I'm just like envisioning you.
The second generation radios got manufactured. And we have some students that connect as far out as 1.3 miles from our school consistently and usefully.
That's incredible.
So for a small district, because we have about a 3 mile by 3 mile footprint, we have lots of trees that block the signal, so we have to do lots of radios. But we've got it covered.
Yeah.
And it's a great feeling to know that if we do have to go into another unexpected closure, that our response is going to be that much better next time.
Exactly. Jason, this is so good. I'm so proud of what you have done and how you have seen it as a mission of a ministry, a mission of peace and justice, and that you've been able to live your faith in this way. And again, just to make it clear, in Community of Christ, when we talk about mission, this is what we're talking about. We are talking about lessening the gap that separates us as people, bridging that gap. And technology in the pandemic is a massive gap, and one of the most important things that people have access to. So any other final words? Or
one other interesting experience for me is we found there's this big church building in the middle of our school district that was blocking a lot of our signals. And so we were able to negotiate a memo of understanding and get permission for that church building to connect to their building, and then put radios on their building to get closer to our students. And it's been interesting to talk about how a faith community and a school district and a secular community can bless each other in so many ways. And I think that's just such a great model for us. We don't have to be these little islands, if you will, of automation, or these little islands that don't speak to each other. As we come together in true community, we do bless people's lives in secular, in spiritual, in so many ways. I love the thought of closing those divides that you're talking about, and it's been a great experience to be able to firsthand be on the front line, kind of be a warrior, so to speak, and be able to, in nonviolent ways, make it all happen.
Yeah. I don't think I realized that the church, because I knew you were doing work in a church, but I don't think I realized that it was in the way and blocking the signal that
and we're going to help them with their streaming on Sunday as well.
Yeah. So it's mutually beneficial. And clearly, I mean, not to speak for the church, but clearly they would want their neighborhood to have access, their kids to have access to the internet as well. So.
And they do, and they feel a much bigger part of what we're doing in our community as well, and I love that.
Yeah, I do too. Oh. Well, Jason, thank you so much for telling this story. Like I said, I mean, I almost feel like I'm sitting down with a celebrity now, because you've gotten so much attention for what you've done, but it is so deserved. And again, I think that what you have done is showed an option, like you said, for others to do the same. And the fact that you are supporting others and mentoring people through this model of what you've done is just really meaningful, because what you're doing has not stayed within the Murray School District. It's gone all over the place, or is in the process of going all over the place. And I'm just really, really excited, and again, love that that's a way that you are living out your faith. So thanks.
Well, thank you, Brittany.
Thanks for listening to Project Zion Podcast. Subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, or whatever podcast streaming service you use, and while you are there, give us a 5-star rating. Project Zion podcast is sponsored by Latter-day Seeker Ministries of Community of Christ. The views and opinions expressed in this episode are of those speaking and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Latter-day Seeker Ministries or Community of Christ. The music has been graciously provided by Dave Hines.